Welcome to Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. My guest this week is mixer, mastering engineer, and host of the Working Class Audio podcast, Matt Boudreau. First of all, Spotify is turning into Big Brother. There's a couple of patents, one that came from late last year and another one that was just granted. The first one is on personality tracking technology. So basically what it does is it makes a model of your 5 personality traits. These are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. The way they came about with those is they analyzed 17.6 million songs, over 662,000 hours of music. This is with 5,800 listeners in the United States in 3 months only. So that's scary enough, but here's what puts it all into perspective. The latest patent is called Identification of Taste Attributes from an Audio Signal. And according to the patent, and I'm reading it now, it says it's a method for processing a provided audio signal that includes speech content and background noise. And then it says the reason for this is it's identifying playable content based on the processed audio signal content. So what that means is Spotify is listening to your voice, listening to you talking, and listening to your environment in order to figure out what songs you should be listening to. The reason for that is it doesn't feel that its current algorithm is precise enough. So it's going to use speech recognition to collect a whole lot more data. Now, this is kind of scary, isn't it? We're into new territory here where Spotify is not only giving you music, giving you audio, but it's also capturing your audio as well. So we're all worried about the government spying on us. But guess what? Spotify may get there first. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. Don't forget about my mixing primer and 101 mixing tricks programs that will help take your mixes to the next level. Go to bobbyowsinskicourses.com to learn more. Now, a few podcasts ago, I was talking about the fact that a lot of audio and MI companies that we're used to may be bought out in the future. The reason why many of the founders are getting older and they want to retire, cash out. In some cases, they're just being taken over by bigger entities. Well, guess what? The shoe just dropped again as Native Instruments was acquired by a company called Francisco Partners out of San Francisco. Now, remember that just about 3 years ago, Native Instruments actually got a $40 million cash infusion from a company called EH Partners. So the founders already cashed out a little bit, and now it looks like big time. The interesting thing here is that Francisco Partners is a big multinational private investment corporation. They've spent $20 billion on over 300 tech companies already. The thing about it is, none of them are in music. Now, the reason why this is being done, according to the company, is that they're trying to make an end-to-end system out of all the products that Native Instruments currently has. So this means things like Machine, Complete, Tractor are all going to be one ecosystem eventually, let alone what they already have with Native Access, which is their subscription, and the Sounds.com audio library. Think about this for a second. Native Instruments started making plugins in 1996. So here we go, 24, 25 years later, and the company is bought by a multinational private investment fund. Is this the future of many more companies in our business? I think it is, especially the ones that lean towards tech. We're going to see more of these private investment funds reaching out and acquiring them as the founders of the audio companies and MI companies get older. I think we're even going to see the old hardware companies rolled up somewhat. As a result, we're still going to have the same amount of products, but there'll just be fewer and fewer companies that will be offering them. My guest this week is Matt Boudreau, who started as a drummer, experiencing six-figure record deals to eventually settling in behind the glass as a mixer and mastering engineer. Matt has since gone on to launch the hugely popular Working Class Audio podcast with more than 300 episodes under his belt. During our interview, we talked about the burden of owning a commercial studio, rebounding from a business loss, template mixing, starting the Working Class Audio podcast, and much more. I spoke with Matt via Zoom from his studio in Northern California. Let's start pretty much at the beginning. I know you were a drummer when you started, but tell me about starting in the music business.
Sure. I think my professional start to it would have been in southern New Mexico in a small town called Las Cruces. And it was there I met my bandmates in school. We all went to school together. We had a band called the Sextants, Sextants, like the navigational instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a trio. And we all went to high school together. And eventually when we graduated, one by one, we all migrated out to San Francisco because we wanted to be rock stars. And when we arrived in San Francisco, and actually before I get to that, many people that I talked to before leaving Las Cruces, I'll never forget, people telling me, "Oh, that's a 1 in a million chance. You'll never get a record deal. Nobody, you're not going to do that. Just stay here." And I, of course, left, and my cohorts and I added a fourth to our group, our singer's sister. So we became a four-piece, 2 guitars, bass, and drums. And within 2 years of arriving, we had secured a record deal with Imago Records, which was a new label run by former Chrysalis Records record man Terry Ellis, and who managed Jethro Tull and signed Blondie and Pat Benatar. And so we were on this new label. It was distributed by BMG. Hugo Burnham, former drummer of Gang of Four, was our A&R rep. And it was quite a ride. And unfortunately, the record was not promoted properly. No offense to the Imago staff, but honestly, people just didn't do their job right. And
where have I heard that one before?
Yeah, that's never happened before. So we were dropped. We were asked to dump our manager at the time, which I was all in favor of, but I was outvoted by my bandmates, unfortunately, and who I love dearly, but we just disagreed on that. And so once we lost our record deal, I decided to quit the band, joined another band called 7 Day Diary, was quickly signed to Reprise, did a record with Joe Ciccarelli. Then we were shifted to Warner Brothers, did a record with Gil Norton. So these are the days of analog tapes, 6-figure record deals, 5-figure video budgets, tour support, and, kind of in the van in a trailer kind of touring. And eventually that band was dropped too. 7 Day Diary was dropped from Warner Brothers. And I just was getting sick of that whole life as a drummer. And so I was asked to produce a record from a band around 1994 in San Francisco. And I got such a thrill doing that enjoyment that came from that completely overtook me. And I decided, I think I'm going to stick to this. This audio thing is just really a very attractive idea to me, as opposed to being a touring drummer.
Well, it's funny because that seems to be a common thread. I know for me, it was kind of the same thing. I was a touring guitar player till I was about 40, and I was the musical director for a formerly famous British guitar player. And it was just such a horrible tour that at the end I thought, no, I just don't want to do this anymore. And in a way, it was the happiest day of my life because, we all identify with being a musician, at least when we start, and that becomes a burden. So that burden was suddenly gone. I was able to concentrate just on being in the studio. I was anyway. I was there all the time, but not having to worry about my chops was a good thing.
Yeah. And the thrill that I got from that first record that I produced was hearing it on the radio. It was played on college radio, and That was a thrill. Seeing it in record stores, that was a thrill. And it was just really on a local level that it was that, this is coming. This wasn't on a national level. It was just within the Bay Area. I was hearing it, seeing it, and I got a rush from that. And that rush was far better than the rush that I got from playing live and touring. So I decided to pursue that path with much more vigor.
So what happened then?
Well, you're leading the life of a touring musician coming in and out of town, and I got off tour. Record deals are gone, and I had kind of an in and out. Touring musicians generally have a job that they can come in and out of at home, I find. And I was no different. I was working for pro audio companies in the Bay Area, which that, of course, was helping to fuel this recording mindset. So I was working for Audio Images, which had been around for a long time, and eventually went on to work for Cutting Edge Audio Group, and just kind of working in and out of pro audio sales, working in the warehouses, helping a bit with, some tech support issues. But eventually it all kind of came to a head when I was at Cutting Edge. Once again, working with a great group of people that I just came to a disagreement with, I realized that working in a warehouse in a pro audio shop was not going to be my path in life. And at first I was promised a job working with people's Pro Tool systems and helping them deal with their issues. And I thought, well, that's cool. I'd like to do that. And I went to go check in with my bosses about it. I said, so what's up? When do I start? And they said, oh, yeah, we hired another guy to do that. So you're going to just stay in the warehouse. And I just said, I'm out of here. I'm done. So I talked to my wife about it at the time, and she said, you're miserable. You should just try this recording thing. And if you fall on your face, well, I've got a corporate job, I'm not going to let us starve. But I jumped into a studio in the Potrero Hill area of San Francisco and never looked back. Just kept going, and it's been a work in progress for since '94. But yeah, I've eked out a living in doing that.
You've had some pretty good mentors. Care to talk about them?
Yeah, I've had a load of mentors. Some don't even know they're my mentors. Well, my first exposure to record making on a high level came from Larry Hirsch. Larry had worked with Los Lobos and John Hyatt and Bonnie Raitt. Joe Ciccarelli, definitely great inspiration to work with coming up. He produced 7 Day Diary. He produced an EP for us. Gil Norton produced the 7 Day Diary record that came out on Warner Brothers. And just watching all these guys work and how that process went, I wished I had paid attention in retrospect a lot closer than I did. I was in the drummer mindset at the time and not in the engineer mindset. But looking back on those experiences, that really kicked me in the butt. But I mean, gosh, there's been a lot of inspiration since, and I get a lot of mentorship and inspiration from some friends of mine who are, that are pretty high level people. I mean, Vance Powell, Andrew Sheps, I've become friends with Chad Blake, and I went out and did the Chad's Mix with the Masters thing at one point. And all of that, all those experiences, there's a little mentorship, I think, in all of these experiences that you have. I don't necessarily think you have to have a designated mentor or set of mentors. I think that the mentorship comes from the experience that you put yourself in, and you get out of it, what you want.
So were you working as a second in studios anywhere?
No. And I look back at, and let me back up, actually. Looking at a lot of people I've talked to who have come up as assistants and seconds in their recording journey, that seems to have worked for a lot of people. I was impatient, and I just wanted to jump in. I used to tell myself, I don't want to work my way up from the bottom cleaning toilets in studios. I'm going to helicopter in, or and drop myself in right in the middle of it. And it was a little naive to say the least, but I basically went freelance from the beginning, and I worked at a small studio in San Francisco. Studio owner would pass me gigs. Shout out to my friend Buddy Salman, who ran that studio. He was an East Coast kind of fast talking, no BS kind of guy. And he was a mentor. He kicked my butt early on. And I learned a bit about, just studio business and how to conduct a session. And, when you're young and you have a bunch of older guys showing up on a session going, "You're the engineer? Really?" Because of your age, that was intimidating. And so that was a big lesson. So I went from that studio to a studio co-op situation in Emeryville, California, where myself and two other engineers would just share a space and contribute financially, contribute gear. And I kind of hit a point there where it was actually the perfect setup. I was making money. I had a lot of clients, was booked on a regular basis. And, we're talking about local bands, no major label stuff, but local bands who paid you at the end of the session. So the cash flow was there. The records were getting done, and it was good. It was solid. But then I got, illusions of grandeur. And my good friend, Michael Romanowski, mastering engineer, came to me, and he and I would have breakfast on a regular basis. And he said, "Hey, so I'm over at the Coast Recorders building," which, for those listening who don't know, that's got a historical significance because it's tied to Bill Putnam. Mercury Records owned it at one point, and Bill Putnam came in and scooped it up and redid the live room. So everybody would always talk about the Bill Putnam room at Coast. And I joined Michael in a co-lease type situation. He ran mastering in the front of the building. I ran the studio in the back. And I thought, this is it, man. This is where it's going to grow right here. And it did grow to some degree. There was some cool sessions, and it was definitely an education, but, quite honestly, it kicked me in the butt. I didn't know what I was doing very, very, regarding business at the time. I kind of like rose to my level of incompetence, really. I got to a point where I was like, yeah, I know how to make a record, but I really don't know how to market the studio. And it was at the beginning of the financial collapse around 2007. And it just progressively got more difficult. The parking disappeared because Twitter was moving in behind us, and there was some other building going on around us. And so not a great neighborhood, bad parking, financial crisis, bad decision-making on my part. And by the end of, I think about 2011, towards the end of it, I came to Michael and I said, "You know what? I know the lease is coming up for renewal, but I got to get out. I'm bouncing checks to the landlord. I'm not saving any money. I had basically taken the great situation in Emeryville and destroyed it. It was just, the operation was not going as it should be." And I came to him because I said, it's causing great tension in my marriage. I've got 2 kids. I just cannot renew this lease. I need your help. And he said, "Family comes first. Let's figure it out." And so we got me off the lease. We got a friend of ours to come in and take over. And I began what essentially was the start of the working class audio mindset and the podcast that would follow, and kind of my Phoenix Rising moment, I guess you might say, at that time.
Well, I want to get to working class audio, but let's talk more about what you're doing in the studio. Does that mean that at that point you moved into your house or something similar?
That's exactly what happened. I got out, went home with my tail between my legs, and I was thinking, okay, what are you going to do? How are you going to do this? So I began to sell off gear that I didn't need. and return gear to people that I had borrowed. I had a lot of support and a lot of people wanted to help me, but I had to return all that stuff because you just can't squeeze it all into a house. And I just began to change my expectations and my mindset. I just said, well, okay, well, why don't you start focusing on mixing and mastering at home, track at other Bay Area studios when you need that infrastructure, and pare it down. And I just kept selling gear left and right, paring it down, refining the process. And that's pretty much how it went. And so business started to pick up, and I had to take on some other gigs. I was doing a live karaoke gig as a drummer. For a period of time, I worked for Lyft. It was a good lesson in humility, and it was a good lesson in what I didn't want to do, how I did not want my life to run. And so, fast forward a little bit. Well, fast forward several years, and we can come back to it. But long story short, I took all the lessons that I learned and applied them, and really just put my nose to the grindstone and to make sure that I wasn't going to be struggling financially, that I could do the audio work that I wanted to do, and kind of ensure myself from financial failure, by using diversification as the anchor point, multiple income streams, so that there's always something going on, always money coming in. And that solves the financial thing, but it also solves, any level of ADD that I may or may not have, because I've always got something cool happening. So that's all of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I know how that works, especially the ADD part. I think we're all in that boat to some degree if you're in this business, where probably you have multiple things going on at the same time, only because you get bored otherwise. I mean, sometimes it's out of need, but most of the time I think it's out of boredom.
Yeah.
Or potential boredom.
Yeah, it works. It works well for me.
The one thing I really like from your story is the fact that you were able to rise above the difficulty, where so many in our business, once they leave or partially leave or have a foot out the door, they don't come back. And it's only those of us who manage to go through that and absorb the punches, so to speak, and keep going. Then when you come out the other side, I think you're all the much better for it on many levels.
Yeah, I think that's my advice to a lot of people who may or may, who are struggling, is, what, figure it out. Don't quit. If you really love it, don't quit. And I'm stubborn. If I have a barrier in front of me, I will go over it, around it. I will figure it out. And one thing I want to point out that really, really helped also was my involvement in what many people call a mastermind group, where every Friday morning I get up for a 6 a.m. call, and I join a group of guys from around the world. I say the world because there's some in England, some in Canada, and we all talk about our various businesses and advise each other, egg each other on. It's kind of an accountability group. Hey, you said last week you were going to work on this. Why didn't you finish that? Is there a problem? Oh, yeah, I did say that. Okay. Let me get on that. So that's been helpful.
Was that from a particular management guru?
No, actually that came from a guest on my podcast, Lid Shaw, actually.
Oh, I know Lid, sure. Yeah.
Lid and I hit it off like brothers. He started to call me my brother from another podcast. And he invited me to this group, met all these people that I've never seen in my life, and eventually met in person through various trade shows, and eventually went to Nashville and stayed at Lidge's house for Summer NAMM one time and met all the rest of the guys. And yeah, that's where that came from. It's just somebody who we had some common ground, and I don't know what would have happened had he not invited me to that. A lot of great things have come about from that as a result.
I've been in a number of those things, and I have to say that some of the best friends of my life till this day came through that. Just that alone, forget about everything else, just that alone was worth the time that I spent.
Yeah, I mean, even my wife was like, she observed. She said, I've you've been at this for a while now, and I really think it's helped. I think it's made a big difference for you. And she said, plus, you get up at the crack of dawn on a Friday morning with such great enthusiasm. So I look forward to it. It's something every Friday that I know I'm going to do, and I have done for several years. That consistency really helps.
I think I remember Lidge referring to that somewhere along the line in our conversations. I haven't talked to him in a while, but I seem to remember somewhere.
Well, and he and I have actually, as of today of this recording, he and I have started another one with just the two of us where we meet on Wednesday mornings at 6 a.m. Of course, it's later for him. He gets the better end of that deal. And we, once again, accountability. We talk about, podcast stuff and give each other ideas. And it's to kind of, segment off a little bit from our primary group. Excuse me. But I advise that for anybody. Just meeting your peers and spending your time in those situations where instead of, doom scrolling on Facebook for hours on end, getting together and spending your time with like-minded people who are going to push you to do your best, no matter what it is, no matter what industry you're in. And, you spend enough time doing that, it's going to lead you to other things that are going to occupy your time that are going to help you, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Let's come back to the studio for a second. So do you find yourself mostly mixing and mastering?
I do. I used to, when I did have a studio or studios in the past, I spent more of my time tracking, overdubbing, and then, mixing at the end of the project. But now that's fallen off considerably for a number of reasons. Because I don't have a regular studio. So when clients talk to me and they say, oh, okay, we got to go to another studio. Okay. Well, actually, we're going to use the house engineer there, and then we'll bring it back to you to mix. I got into mastering a few years ago, kind of hesitant to do it at the time because I had been, brought up around and spent an enormous amount of time, excuse me, around really great mastering engineers, Michael Romanowski, Ken Lee, Paul Stubblebine, and John Greenham. And when you spend time around those guys, you get kind of intimidated to think, I'm just going to stick to being just a straight up engineer. But over time, people would come to me, I'd master something, and I wouldn't advertise it. I'd just say, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And it kept snowballing. People kept bringing me stuff. Hey, we really like what you're doing with this. Can you work with us? And so I just said one day, fine, I'm going to master and mix, not necessarily together, but independently of one another.
I ask this of everybody that does mastering. When did you get to the point where you felt, oh, I got this? I feel very comfortable doing it.
That's a good question. Boy, I would say probably about a year ago, honestly. I just kind of hit a point where I'd hear something and I'd go, okay, I already know the problems that this has. My trepidation, even to this day, comes not when I'm sending the master to the client for them to approve. I just have some superstition about, for those that are going to do CDs, when I send a DDP file to someplace, I just have this fear that it's going to explode like a message on Mission Impossible on the other end. And I get scared and I think, please don't blow up. Please just stay together. I don't want CDs showing up with some, something that went wrong in that process, but it never has. And it's an unfounded fear, but I guess if I'm going to get fearful about anything, that's okay. But yeah, I feel much more confidence in mastering now than I did. And I think that I think others who know what to do would get into mastering, but I think for a long time, I had a lot of fear that, well, I don't have, the $5,000 box here and the $10,000 box here and the $100,000 set of speakers. And I just started to lose my fear of that because the results were making the clients happy. And I've always been kind of I don't care, what kind of stove or pots and pans you have, as long as the meal tastes good, that's what's important.
Out of curiosity, what speakers are you using for mastering?
I've got Amphion 118s and I love them. I've got a small room, and for a while I had some Klein and Hummel 0300s, and Klein and Hummel, for those that don't know, were eventually bought by Sennheiser, who owns Neumann, and rebranded as Neumann, I think 0310s or something. I had those in this room because they were a holdover from my previous studio, and they were just too big for the room. So I tried the Amphions and fell in love with them, and immediately could hear like, oh yeah, these work for this room. You can hear it in the bottom end. And, between that and some Odyssey LCD XCs and just some common sense, testing in the car, testing on consumer stuff, I feel great confidence in what I send out to people.
I have 118s too.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Fantastic speakers.
Yeah, I got turned on to them by a friend. I was producing a record. When I produce, I don't engineer. I usually have somebody else engineer. And we were doing it at his studio, and he had two 18s. And I just fell in love with them. They were so good. It's like, well, okay, I think I'm sold. And I got the whole setup with the amplifier and the speaker cable and everything, but I'm happy that I did.
As did I. Got that fancy speaker cable, and I chose the higher power amp to couple with these.
Me too.
I had the lower power one, and then I said, these sound great, but can I hear the higher power amp? And they sent it out, and immediately I was like, yeah, this is the way to go. And I actually just sold my NS10s. I had NS10M studios for, I don't know, for a long time. And I got rid of them. I got the Reftone 2LDs, and I put those with my old Yamaha, what is it, P2200 or 22 something, way overpowered amp for these speakers, but gosh, they sound good.
Power is the secret.
It really is. Power and headroom.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Let's talk about mixing for a second. Do you have any favorite mixing tricks that you use pretty regularly?
Well, I'll tell you something, and this relates to an episode of yours, the Billy Decker episode. So I've interviewed Billy, and I was initially attracted to his story of mixing in such a short period of time, and got influenced by that. But then I didn't know what to do. But then he was on your show recently talking more about it, and I found out about his book that's coming out. I think you can.
No, it's out. You can get it. I bought it.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, it's on Amazon.
Their publisher sent me an advance copy, and I sat down and I never do this, but I did it with this because I was just so curious. I sat with my iPad with the book on it on one part of the couch. Imagine me sitting in my living room watching TV. In fact, watching The West Wing on Netflix, episode after episode. And I've got Billy's book, and I've got my laptop remote controlling my other laptop in my control room. And I methodically went through that book, plug-in by plug-in, track by track, and I completely modeled his template. And I've done that before for Andrew Sheps and got pretty good results, I would say, with Andrew's. There's a few things I didn't understand and didn't bother to call him up and say, hey, what are you doing here? I just didn't want to hassle him. But with Billy's, I read that book, put it into practice, and I took 3 mixes that I had just sent to a client. And I listened to those mixes, with that kind of distance after having sent them and having been away from them for a while. And they weren't approved mixes yet either. And I listened to them and I was like, ooh, I don't know about those. And I ran them through Billy's template, took a little bit of time, like about, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes to kind of go, well, that's not working. I wonder why that's not working. Oh, here's the problem. Figured it out, redid all those mixes in a matter of, like Billy says, like 45 minutes. And I sent the mixes to the client, and the client emails me back. He goes, I don't know what you did, but these sound 100 times better than what you initially sent me. You can check this one off your list, this one off your list. I've got a question about this one on the vocal. There's a line, blah, 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 tweak. And I started to just take old mixes and run them through this template and really just kind of put it through its paces, and would sit back and just go, wow, okay. I wouldn't have made a lot of these choices that he's making. Some things just don't seem right to me, or just stylistically, I wouldn't have made these decisions. But I'll tell you something, Bobby, that thing works. These mixes sound big. They sound commercial and bombastic in a great way. And, I've made a couple modifications, of course, like anybody would. But that's my favorite trick as of late is, get Billy's book and give it a shot. It may not work for everybody, and it's certainly not going to work for all forms of music, but, being a two guitar drum, two guitars, bass and drums kind of guy, that's my jam right now is Billy's template.
It's funny. I've been promising myself that I'm going to do it, and I just haven't had the time to spend with it that I feel I need to have, maybe over the holidays. I have to say, though, I had the same conclusion in many cases. I'd be looking at what he would do here or there, and a lot of times it made perfect sense. I go, oh, yeah, okay, that's cool. And then there'd be some I'd be scratching my head on thinking, oh, why did he do that?
I know.
But on the other hand, he's gotten results, and obviously it worked for you.
I think that he did a record, I'm not like a huge country music fan or anything, but there's some records out there that I hear that I'm attracted to. He did a record by this band. I think they're from North Carolina called Parmalee. And I think the name of the album, I'm going to say it was Carolina. I may be wrong. But I heard those mixes around the time that I interviewed him sometime in the past. And I was just like struck at how spacious and punchy that they were, and all the words we used to describe a mix. And then to learn that he does those kind of mixes fast and in the box on an old Pro Tools system, it's like, what is going on here? How does this guy do this? And I think that's part of his secret is he's got a great template going and years of experience doing it.
He's pretty open about the whole thing too.
He definitely is. He's very it's like David Copperfield, opening up, his bag of tricks and go, this is how I make the jet disappear.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. I love that. I love that he's open about it because as he said, I'm not Billy. I don't have his ears. He doesn't have my ears, and I'm going to get completely different results than he does. But the results I'm getting are working for me. So I'm going to stick to it for a while and see where it takes me.
It's pretty much the same responses that I was getting when I first did the first edition of the Mixing Engineer's Handbook. And I went and I interviewed all the engineers that I knew. They were all top people. And they'd be very open about what they're doing. And I would say, are you sure you want to give that away? And the overwhelming response to that was, well, nobody can do it like me anyway. Which is kind of true.
Yeah.
But you and Billy could take the same songs, run it through the same template, and it would still sound different, I'm sure. Yeah.
But I found that in spite of the fact that I primarily like to work in the rock genre, I mean, there's so many commonalities between modern country and rock anyway, that even if we were to work on the same song, as you say, I would come up with completely different results and make different decisions about the balance than he would.
Let's talk about working class audio.
Okay.
How did that start?
Well, as I mentioned in my previous studio, my last studio, that was an ass kicking experience. And it rattled me in a big way. And I had all these questions. I thought, well, how are other people doing this? Why am I failing at this? Why can't I do this? And I thought, wow, I really want to ask questions of people. And I want to talk about my experience of changing my mindset about business and how to handle audio and not get yourself in debt. And there was just all these themes swirling around. And I said it out loud to myself. I was like, I've got to come up with like a more, I don't know, like a working class audio kind of way of doing this. And I kind of stopped and thought, well, that's a great title. Maybe I should do a blog. Quickly found out I hated doing blog work. I hated writing. Not really good at it. But many, many years ago in my Emeryville studio, when podcasting first became a thing that you could do, I was listening to, God, what's his name? Adam who was a VJ on MTV.
Oh, yeah, right.
Adam Curry.
Yeah.
Adam Curry was doing a podcast, and I was just to kind of take you back, and I'll bring it back to the working class audio thing, but he was doing these podcasts, and I would imagine like him being in this cottage. He was living in England for a period of time, I think, and he was using like an iRiver recorder or something. And he was, at the time when the internet was really still in its infancy, and I was captivated by it. So I tried a thing called the Broken Radio Podcast. It was based around my studio in Emeryville, and I would interview local musicians. I probably did like 6 or 7 episodes, and then I was like, I'm done with this. I don't see the point. And I stopped. So when I got sick of trying to write for working class audio as a blog, I realized I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to go back and do that podcast thing. Yeah. And I'll just interview other engineers. So I just started to reach out to various engineers, and the early ones, like Vance and Andrew were like, they were friends. So they were like, yeah, I'll be on your podcast. Sure. And I got a phone call. And I don't know if he'd remember this, but there's a guy out there named Chevy Shevlin. And I think Chevy worked for Pensado's place at the time, or had some connection to it. I'm not sure what his connection was to it, to be honest, but he called me. I don't know how he got my number, but he called me randomly. And he said, you don't know me. I work for Pensado. I think what you're doing is really special. And I think you need to think about some sponsorship opportunities for yourself, because what you're doing is different. You're not talking about gear. You're talking about people's journeys and all the things that nobody else talks about or comes close to, you're probably the closest person, Bobby, who does it, who gets into other stuff besides just the gear. And I said, okay, well, thank you. Yeah, I'll take that into consideration. And I called a friend of mine who does business development. And I said, hey, I just got this call, this guy, he says this. And my friend, who's an old friend, who's been very dear to me over the years, said, absolutely, let's kick it into gear. And I said, okay, what do we do? And he said, well, let me go talk to my friend Lisa, who is the CEO of Twit TV, This Week in Tech. Her husband is Leo Laporte. They're up in Petaluma where my friend was at. And long story short, he met with Lisa. He comes back to me and he says, Lisa says, if you want to do this, you got to do this, this, and this. That included a weekly show. You got to put a sales deck together for potential sponsors to let them know what you're offering. I followed their directions to the letter, and we picked up the first sponsor. Technically, was Gear Sluts, because I called Jules at Gear Sluts because he's an old friend, and I thought, well, Jules knows something about banner ads. Let me see if Jules will give me some advice. Jules then he sends me a message back. He says, I need you to get on Skype right now. So we get on Skype and he goes, let me tell you something. I listen to a ton of podcasts. This is a fantastic show. I want to be a part of it. Let's do a deal. No money deal. Let's just trade. You promote Gear Sluts, I'll promote working class audio. And I was nobody. So I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. Sure. So Jules comes on board. We get the sales deck together. Audio-Technica comes on board. The audience is growing quickly. And I'm just kind of in shock because I think, well, this is going a different way than I had expected. Okay, let's see what happens. And it just continued to grow. The audience continued to grow. The sponsors continued to come in. The podcast was paying for itself. And it was also kind of shaping the narrative for me. I was like, okay, I've got to follow the advice that I'm being given, and then I'm telling people. And that in turn started to shift my life drastically. My home life improved, my business improved, my everything improved around me. It was really remarkable. So to this day, as of this, I think I'm at 311 episodes, 312, and still going every Monday. I've never missed an episode. And it's been a great experience. It's opened a lot of doors. It's introduced me to a ton of people, and including you. You've been an inspiration to me because I listen to your show. And yeah, it's been fantastic.
Well, likewise, I really enjoy your show. I don't have a lot of time to listen to podcasts. I wish I had more, but I make an exception for yours. You're a really good interviewer.
Thank you.
You know, that doesn't come easily from the standpoint that I've been on shows and I've been interviewed where people will have a list of questions and they're not going to vary from them no matter what. To me, that's not a conversation. You know, you have to go where the conversation is moving, and that's when it becomes fun.
I think subconsciously you influence me because I don't write my questions down. I just go at it and say, I know that there's some things I want to know about this person, but it's given me the confidence to just jump in with anybody and just start asking questions.
I have a list of bullet points, and I don't often get through them all, but I know where I want to go. Many times it just goes in a different direction that's more fun, that's better, unexpected.
I think I've told you this before, and I'll tell you this again. I was with my friend Pete Dell, mastering engineer.
Oh, yeah. Know him well.
Pete and I were out at a dinner together, and I went to the bathroom. As I was coming out of the bathroom, you were sitting at a table with a group of people, and I'd been listening to your show, and I was a little starstruck, Bobby. I was like, holy shit, that's Bobby Owsinski. And Pete walks by, and he goes, what's up? I said, that's Bobby Owsinski. He goes, oh, yeah, that is Bobby. And he just went to the bathroom, and I was left there kind of like, should I bother? No, I'm not going to bother him. So I didn't bother you, and I went back to my table, and Pete eventually came back to the bathroom, and we finished up our dinner with our crew of people. And you were a big influence on me early on, and still are. So kudos to you and your show.
I have to say my show came about completely differently than yours. I was on, and I still am on, another podcast. I think it's the oldest audio podcast going, and it's Audio Nowcast, run by Mike Rodriguez. I was on episode 97 as a guest, and then they asked me to stay on as a panel member. I don't hit all of them, but I hit most of them, and it's a very diverse group of people. But somewhere along the line, there was a listener that reached out to me and said, you should have your own podcast. And I went, I don't have the time for another project. I don't think so. And he said, look, you just do the interviews and I'll do the rest. This is what I do. I set up podcasts for people. So I said, okay. And that's kind of how it started. But right from the beginning, my whole idea was I don't want sponsors. This is branding, strictly branding for me. Now, definitely I want to have guests and I want to talk to them. I want to find out more about them and I want to promote them. But I'm going to stay away from sponsors, and I still do. For better or for worse. Part of me thinks, maybe some sponsors wouldn't be so bad. But on the other hand, it's worked so far for what I needed.
I definitely early on made a conscious decision to not bring on products or companies that I don't personally believe in.
Yeah.
Because I know that the temptation is to go, well, hey, all these people want to give me money. Sure, I'll just take on anybody. But I just said, no, it's got to be something that I use, that I believe in. And case in point, reverb.com is a sponsor, but I've been using Reverb for a number of years. In fact, in my struggling years at Post Studio, I sold so much of my gear on Reverb with great results. So it has to be a situation like that for me to have a sponsor on. And, there's only so much room in a podcast, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to choose very carefully.
Last question, Matt. What you know what this is probably because you listen to my podcast.
What's the best business advice I can give?
That's it.
Diversify. If that is just to me the name of the game. I know that for a lot of us, our passion, just speaking in terms of like music, let's just keep it boiled down to music. A lot of us want to be music producers, engineers, etc. Along the way, it will behoove you to bring in income from other sources. And if that happens to be doing audiobooks or audio cleanup or some other form of audio, fine. If it has to be work with an audio company, great. If you got to go do a thing at Starbucks temporarily, or even not even temporarily, if you just got to bring in income from multiple streams, you remove the single point of failure in your equation, and it insulates you a bit. And this pandemic has really been proof to me that those that I know, including myself, who have done this, have kind of protected themselves from loss of income. So I can expound on that or not, but diversification essentially, I think, is the name of the game.
You can find out more about Matt at mattboudreau.com. That's Matt, M-A-T-T, Boudreau, B-O-U-D-R-E-A-U, all one word, .com. You can also find out about the Working Class Audio podcast at Working Class Audio, all one word, workingclassaudio.com. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. To listen to the episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to bobbyowsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or go to bobbyoinnercircle.com, where you can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Mixcloud, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, TuneIn Radio, Radio Public, and Podbean. At bobbyowsinski.com and bobbyoinnercircle.com, you'll also find a sign-in form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.